Well, if you remember from the very first day of class when I was telling you my story, we have lived and worked in Indonesia. We lived in India and worked in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. Today I just finished a lovely Turkish meal, and if you look behind me you can see a park and then a highway that leads to an area where some friends who are showing me around town minister to refugees coming from majority Muslim countries around Africa. Why am I telling you all of that? Because if I asked you to tell me about your stereotypical Muslim, you would probably tell me about an Arab. But none of the places that I've just told you about are Arabs. Most Muslims are not Arabic. There are actually more Muslims in India alone than in the entire Middle East. So why do we assume that Muslim and Arabic are synonymous? Because that's where it all began, and that's what we're going to learn in today's session. How did Islam begin? What was Arabia like before Muhammad? And how did he develop this religion that now has reached every corner of the globe? Welcome back to Traditional World Religions and Cults. Today we're going to begin our discussion of Islam. Islam being the largest non-Christian religion in the world, we're going to devote a little bit more of our attention to it than we have to other topics. This will be the first of 4 lectures on Islam. They're going to be interrupted by Missions Week. But today we're just going to start by looking at Islam, giving a brief history and background to it. Begin to get a bit of understanding of some of the terms and a brief history. I want to start by looking at the word Islam and what does it mean. The 3 letters there in the green are the letters starting from right to left, which is the way that Arabic is read, S-L-M. They create a root word, and that root word would be pronounced Slam. So Salam is the word for peace, and it is the same root word as the word Islam and Muslim, or used in the greeting Assalamu alaikum. I capitalized the S, L, and M in those 3 words just for you to get a chance to look at that. Salam is closer to the idea, you can even hear the word shalom, the Hebrew concept of peace. It's not a lack of war peace, it's a deeper and richer completeness, a wholeness, a unity. And so theoretically, Islam is the religion of Islam. A Muslim is a person who follows the way of Salam. So all of these things are related to being in a perfect, complete, whole unity. Now that's important because we find that peace by submitting to authority. That's why sometimes you will hear people say Islam means submission. It actually means the way of peace that is found through submission. So all of those words are related, and I wanted you to see that. And I also want you to understand as we go through the course that Islam is a religion and a Muslim is a person. I know you know better than to ever say these things, but every once in a while I'll come across somebody says, tell me about that Muslim religion, or have you ever met any of those Islams? And I just want to make sure you know that Islam is a religion, a Muslim is a person who follows the religion of Islam. Never call a Muslim a Mohammedan. That would imply someone who follows Muhammad or worships Muhammad, which is a very offensive thing to say to a Muslim. You may find that in particularly some older articles and books that you might come across, but that's not the word that we would want to use. So just with that in mind, I also want to talk about some other terms for you to know. There's a paper that you can print out and take a quick test just to make sure that you understand the words. When you begin to read about Islam, when you begin to talk to Muslims, they're going to use Arabic or Arabicized words, vocabulary. So just want to make sure that you know. These first list are just some common introductory terms. So print out that test, take it really quickly, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the answers, okay? So F would be Allah. That is the Arabic term used for God. It is simply the Arabic term for God. There's a lot of debate. Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Obviously, the God of the Bible is not the God of the Quran. The way that he behaves, the way that he reveals himself in his Son, the way that he speaks through his word. But that being said, I don't have a problem with using Allah when talking about the one true God, because That's just the Arabic word for God. It's the word that was used by Christians before there was a religion called Islam. It is the word that is used for God in languages like Arabic, Indonesian, Malaysian. So we don't say that we support your understanding of God. We have a different understanding of God. But just like we would still talk about God to a Mormon, or we would talk about God to a Jehovah's Witness, to a Muslim, we can talk about Allah and help them understand who He is. Second word there, hello, is assalamu alaikum, which is peace be unto you, that peace that we just talked about. Wa alaikum assalam is the response, and to you peace. Muslims tend to call Jesus Christ Isa al-Masih, which just means Jesus the Messiah. A church in many Arabic contexts is known as a Jamaat. A Jamaat technically is just a gathering. So it's closely related to the ecclesia, the called out to gather together. Hell is Jahannam. Satan is either Shaitan or Iblis. And prayer is known as dua or doa. So you may hear those words as you're talking to Muslims. Second set of words are going to be related to the prophets. I hope you've already filled out this section of the little quiz there. But just so that you will understand when they're telling stories, have you ever heard of the prophet Yahya? Have you ever heard of Ilyas? That you would know who they were talking about. So in Arabic culture, or in cultures that have been influenced by Islam, so even if they don't speak Arabic, like in Indonesia or Malaysia or South Asia, they're going to use these terms. They will call Jeremiah Armiya. They will call Abraham Ibrahim. They will call Eve Hawa. They will call Jacob Yaqub. They will call David Daud. They will call Moses Musa. They will call John the Baptist Yahya. They will call Jonah Yunus. They will call Elijah Elias. As you begin to make friends with Muslims, you're going to meet a lot of people with these names, and you may think, oh, that's an interesting name. I wonder what it means. And now you know they were named for one of the prophets. There are also books that are used between Christians and Muslims that we can talk about in common. And so take just a minute to make sure that you've thought through, when you hear this name of a book, what book they might be talking about. The Bible is the Kitab-i Muqaddas, which literally translated is the Holy Book. So they referred to the Bible as the Holy Book. The Pentateuch would be the Taurat or the Torah. The Psalms are also considered to be the words of David, Zabur. The prophets would be the Nabi, and that would be a reference to the books of the prophets, but also in talking about a prophet, you would talk about a Nabi. And then the Gospels are the Injil, the words that were given to, according to a Muslim, the prophet Isa, according to us, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. So just wanted to have those terms before us, that if you come across those in your reading or in your conversation with a Muslim, you would know what they were looking at, what they were talking about. So now to get to the history portion, we want to talk about some of the history of Islam. We want to start with a quick look at pre-Islamic Arabia. What was the world there in green? What was it like before Muhammad was born? Before we can fully understand Islam, we need to know a little bit about the culture into which Islam came. Muslims refer to this period as the age of ignorance, or the Jahiliyyah. This was a time when they did not know about God as He was going to reveal Himself through the Prophet Muhammad. The Arabian Peninsula is often considered to be the cradle of Islam, and the Arabic term for the peninsula is the Jaziratul Arab, or the island of Arabia. If you look at this picture of the globe and you see where it's located, you can see that this peninsula is water on three sides and then a very fierce desert on the fourth side, isolating them as if they were on an island. The environment there is extremely harsh, bordered by the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Persian Gulf. And so during the time leading up to the 6th century AD, the peoples of the Arabian Peninsula were in the midst of transition. The Arabs were a Semitic people related culturally and linguistically to the Hebrew peoples of the Old Testament. We know that from Scripture they come from Ishmael, so they are cousins, sometimes referred to as cousins because they are descended from the family of Abraham, but not through the line of Isaac. Traditional tribal communities were beginning to settle into urban areas. As a result of this integration, there were the beginnings of a movement toward a pan-Arab unity in the place of tribal squabbles. Northern Arabia was still predominantly nomadic. The Bedouin tribes were traveling around, but the southern portion of the peninsula was beginning to settle down. They were, again, Semitic peoples related to what we understand of Old Testament culture, and much of what was happening there would be familiar to a scholar of the Old Testament. Both groups centered their lives on tribes that were constantly in conflict with one another and with outside forces. As a result of political intrigues, the Greeks or Byzantine Christians seemed to be particularly ruthless and were widely hated. According to Karen Armstrong in her book, Islam: A Short History, the Christians and the Jews would taunt the Arabs because God had never sent them a prophet of their own. When the tribes began to get together, they began to develop a system of democratic government. In this tribal system, they would have a sheikh or a sayyid to rule the tribe, but he ruled according to the practices of the ancestors known as the sunnah, with the help of a council of elders known as the majlis. These terms are important because they are going to be brought into the decision-making process of Islam, particularly the larger branch, the 85% who would identify themselves as Sunni. The word Sunni coming from that word sunnah there, but we'll talk about that more later. The sheikh was more of a judge than a king. Loyalty was to the tribe only, not to any greater sense of nationhood. And when a person within a tribe was attacked, the attack had to be avenged by the rest of this tribe. For this reason, it was very important to remain a part of your tribe so that you would have protection. There had been a brief period of semi-unity under a Jewish king named Dhu-Nawas, who persecuted the Christian population within the peninsula. And at the same time, there was beginning to be some religious change. The peoples of Arabia were traditionally animists and idol worshippers. Jews and monastic Christians who were living in the area were having an influence on them. They began to develop a concept of monotheism. In traditional worship, they followed the sun goddess and the moon god, often referred to as Allah or the God. They worshiped these deities at many shrines, the most important of which was the Kaaba in Mecca. Part of their worship included the burial of live infant girls. Among the other influential gods, there were 3 female deities, Lat, Manat, and Uzza, known as the daughters of Allah. Arabs from various tribes would come to Mecca annually for a Hajj, a pilgrimage, during which time they observed most of the rituals associated with the Islamic Hajj today. Many Christians in the area at that time would also participate in the Hajj. So this is the world into which Muhammad was born. He was born in the year 570 in the Arabian city of Mecca. His family was the Qurayshi tribe. They traced their line to Abraham through Hagar and Ishmael. They came at least once a year to worship at the Kaaba, which they believed had been established by Abraham when he was living in Mecca with Hagar and Ishmael. Muhammad's father, Abdullah, died before Muhammad was born. His mother, Amina, died when he was 6, and he then lived with his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Then, when he was 8 years old, his grandfather also died, and so Muhammad went to live with his uncle Abu Talib. Abu Talib is going to be important in the story later. According to the Survey of Islam by the Institute for the Study of Islam and Christianity, a young Muhammad and his uncle were traveling on business when their caravan passed the cell of a hermit monk who normally ignored traffic. But on this occasion, he invited the party to a feast. They left the camels with the youngest member, but the monk insisted on the presence of all. Bohera had an ancient book predicting the coming of a great prophet, and through supernatural intuition, he had become aware of his presence in the caravan. He had seen a cloud and a tree protecting him from the glaring sun. When the boy was brought to him, he saw a mark between his shoulders, a sure seal of prophethood. This boy was, of course, Muhammad. The monk advised Abu Talib to take special care of him, since the Jews might wish to cause him harm. Muhammad came back and spent his time in solitary contemplation about the things that they had discussed. End of quote. So there's idea from his childhood that there was a special mark on him, that God was going to use him in an important way, and that some of this thought was influenced by Christians or misguided Christians even early in his life. In the year 595, he married Khadija. She was a wealthy widow for whom Muhammad had worked. Their marriage produced 4 daughters and 2 sons, but both boys died in infancy. Khadija was the first convert to Islam. They adopted Ali, the son of Muhammad's uncle, and then Ali later married their daughter Fatima. So in many ways, Ali is like a son to Muhammad, even though he's technically a cousin. They also adopted a boy named Zaid. Because of Khadija's wealth, Muhammad was able to have free time to spend in meditation. He would go off into a cave on Mount Hira to reflect on the poor state of his people. Eventually, Muhammad had a total of 9 wives, but he never took a second wife as long as Khadija was alive. In the year 610, so after 15 years of marriage to Khadija, Muhammad was in a cave on Mount Hira outside of Mecca, sleeping when, according to him, the angel Jibril or Gabriel first spoke to him. The first surah or chapter of the Quran to be revealed was 96 verses 1 through 5. At the same time, he received 82 1 through 7, 10 through 18, and 89 17 through 24. You don't need to remember those numbers, but the reason that's important is to remember that the Quran is not organized chronologically, and it is not organized depending on when it was revealed. It was organized on the longest chapter to the shortest chapter. So it doesn't read straight through as a story. But these were the first passages that were revealed to him, and they focused on God's revelation, humankind's proper response, which is grateful worship and social justice. Muhammad only claimed to be a messenger or guide. He never claimed to be a miracle worker. That ability has been attributed to him over time. As a matter of fact, when he first reported hearing from Allah, he thought he was demon-possessed. He said, "I'm hearing spirits. I don't know what's going on." And Khadija assured him that he was hearing from the Lord and he should begin to teach others the things that he was hearing. During the first 4 years of his ministry, he only had about 40 converts, and at this point he felt a close affinity to Christians and Jews. He felt like he was finally getting the opportunity to hear God's word for Arabs as it would apply to them the same way the Jews and the Christians had their prophets. He borrowed the word salat for ritual prayers, including prostration at set times of the day facing the holy city, which originally was Jerusalem. His questions about the divinity of Christ were also common to the Jews and many of the sects of Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula. In 620, Khadija and Abu Talib both died. So this is his wife and his uncle, who was like a father to him, who was one of the first men to convert to Islam. In 622, in September, Muhammad and his followers escaped to Yathrib. You maybe have never heard of Yathrib. It was later renamed Al-Madinah, which means the city. He had been invited to come to the city to bring unity a year earlier, and this emigration is considered the first year in the Islamic calendar. You may sometimes see a date AH. Normally we see BC before Christ and AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. But an Islamic calendar will be dated AH, Anno Hijra, or the year of the flight. Earlier it was hard for me to understand because it seemed to me to be a defeat, but it was the defining moment in his career. He declared that family, tribal, and blood ties were no longer important. The key was theological position. He was declaring himself to be not just a prophet, but also a political leader. In 630, Muhammad and his followers returned to Mecca and destroyed all of the idols inside of the Kaaba. In 632, Muhammad died. In 631, he preached his final message. "This day I perfected religion for you and completed my favor unto you and have chosen for you a religion, Islam." During his lifetime, he taught a pure form of monotheism. He protected women through laws on property ownership, and he stopped the killing of baby girls, and he regulated the process of divorce. He brought political unity to the Arabian Peninsula. He moved away from tribalism and put an emphasis on the individual over the lineage, and he sought to end tribal prejudices and replace it with a larger ummah or community to which all people could belong. Islam then began to spread. You see here in the dark brown the areas that were considered to be under Islamic rule or under Islamic control by the death of Muhammad. And then in the orange you see how it grew during the Rashidun Caliphate. These are the rightly guided caliphs. That's another term that you will hear. There were 4 of them. Muhammad had no intention of dying. Who does? And so he had no plans for a successor. When he did die, the young community was not sure how to proceed. More accurately, there were many different plans. People who were sure that they were the one who was to take over leadership, but not everybody was in agreement. The people of Medina, who protected Muhammad and Islam in the beginning, thought they should be in charge. The Qurayshi tribe, Muhammad's family, thought they should be in control, refused to allow anyone from outside the tribe to lead them. But finally, Muhammad's closest associates or companions agreed to follow Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph or deputy. He was in charge from 632 to 634. He was Muhammad's father-in-law and the first male convert to Islam. He He was a bold leader who tried to follow what he thought were Muhammad's plans, and under his brief leadership, Islam broke out of the Arabian Peninsula and immediately sent an army into Syria, even though it left him with uncertain support and no loyal defenders. He said this was what Muhammad had planned prior to falling ill, and so he had to carry out his last wishes. Not wanting to repeat the chaos, when Abu Bakr realized he was ill, he appointed Umar to follow him. Umar served from 634 to 644. He continued the military expansion that had been started by Abu Bakr. He added Egypt and Palestine to the Islamic fold. Many Christian tribes in the area, tired of Roman domination and no longer receiving Roman support for fighting the Arabs, chose to side with Islam against the Byzantine and the Roman empires. Christianity continued both in Egypt through the Coptic Christian Church and in Palestine. Another aid in the fight was the concept introduced by Muhammad that those who died in battle on behalf of Islam would be transported immediately to paradise. Umar was a good military leader, but not much of an administrator. He instituted harsh taxes on Muslim peoples, expelled Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula, and he issued a tax, the jizya, which was supposed to pay for military protection, but it actually was a form of extortion. Under him, over 10,000 churches were either destroyed or turned into masjids, worship places for Muslims. He was followed by Uthman, who served from 644 to 656. Uthman was a member of the same tribe as Muhammad, but a different family, and many people wanted Ali, Muhammad's nephew, son-in-law, adopted son, but they were all outvoted and outmaneuvered. One of Uthman's most important contributions to Islam was he standardized the Quran. He made a complete collection of all pieces of the Quran that were recorded anywhere, came up with one single version, and destroyed every other competing version. He proved to be very unpopular, appointed members of his own family as leaders over all of the cities. He was hated by virtually everyone and was finally overthrown in a rebellion in 656 to be replaced by Ali. He made a critical mistake in his response to the rebellion. He said that what they did was wrong, but he was afraid to take any action against them. As a result, those who were faithful to Uthman resented the lack of action, and the rebels resented him for saying they were wrong, so he offended both sides of the civil war. There was a long debate over who should actually be in charge, but Ali's position as caliph was reconfirmed through a system of arbitration in 659. Some of his followers ended up killing him 2 years later because they thought accepting this arbitration was un-Islamic. Following his death, Islam was split forever into two main branches, which we'll talk about in more detail later. The Sunni, who followed the Sunnah or traditions of the Prophet, and the Shia, literally the party, who believed the leader of Islam is a hereditary position that would go through the line of Ali. After the rightly guided caliphs, we have the Umayyad Caliphate. You see the yellow part indicates how Islam expanded under their leadership from 661 to 750. During this period, most of the Christians in conquered lands converted to Islam, some by choice, some by force, by a desire to escape the heavy taxes that were being imposed on them. And then from 750 to 1238, we have the Abbasid Caliphate. The rulers of Islam were taken from the Abbas family, and during this time, nationalism grew within Islam and the Sufi movements began to take form. Islam gradually lost unity as a single entity, and individual Islamic countries started to emerge. Spain was one of the first countries to redeclare its independence, and during this period, the main capital moved to Iraq, eventually to Baghdad. And so you see, as Islam continues to expand, it also begins to fragment. Between 1096 and 1270, Islam faced 6 major military attacks from Europe, known collectively as the Crusades. Although the major motivation behind the wars was opening trade routes and political expansion from Europe, the Crusades are usually viewed as Christian attacks on Islam and have left a bitter scar on Christian-Islamic relations. While the Caliphate continued in name until the 1920s, the Islamic kingdom effectively ended in 1258 when the Mongol ruler Genghis Khan expanded his rule into the Middle East. So pushing back out from Asia, from what we know as China today, he pushed back down through Central Europe and established his leadership in that area. So you see, that was kind of where Islam expanded to under the caliphs and where it kind of stands today. We're going to take a break, as I said, and look next week at the International Mission Board. We're going to be hearing some workers share about what God has been doing where they are. We'll pick back up again with the teachings of Islam, different segments of Islam, and how to share the gospel with Muslims the following week. God bless. Well, that began to give you a picture of how Islam has spread around the globe. but it's continued to spread since that last picture in that last map. So I want to ask you about where you live right now. How far are you from the closest mosque or masjid? Do you even know? Look up in your phone book and look on the internet, see if you can find how far it is to the nearest mosque. Maybe even consider going there and praying and meeting some people. We're going to be talking in more detail about Islam and how you can share with Muslims. Look for opportunities to build those relationships.